Perfect technique is keeping you small and weak. Why?
Well, there are definitely a few reasons. If you are moving in a slow and controlled way, generally you're going to be moving less weight. And that might be the right move sometimes. Maybe if it's a prehab movement or you have an injury or you're working around some ache and pain, it's a new movement. Those are all very reasonable reasons why someone might be moving in a very slow and controlled way. But it could get in the way of your progression. And there's usually this happy medium where there are the people who are just throwing around weights and just their bent over rows are sort of like a deadlift with a little bit of arm bend at the top. I've been there. And then there's the other side where someone's like, just, you can see they're thinking. They're thinking about what they're doing. And it's okay to think about your training, but try to do it not when you are training.
And the row is a great example of that because by virtue of the exercise design, it is hardest at the top.
Yeah.
So if you're using a really light weight that allows you to use perfect technique, sure, you can get that contraction. You can pause at the top of the movement, but perfect technique in that situation is doing you a disservice because when you're lifting heavy enough on a row, your first handful of reps, maybe towards 10, will be perfect technique. You're getting that complete range of motion. But you need to be going through those final few reps where you're just maybe doing a few lengthened partials to reach muscular fatigue. This is where, by using heavier weights, you're able to accomplish that goal as well for that exercise.
Yeah, there's a difference between lightweight and lightweight baby. We're trying to go for lightweight baby here, where, okay, maybe you aren't quite getting that full contraction at the top, or maybe you're using a little bit of momentum in some cases in order to try to smooth out that resistance curve. And so you're not just failing in this tiny little part of the range of motion, because we care about the concentric, but the entire concentric. We care about the contraction at the top, but then we also care about the eccentric as well. And so if you're moving in a really slow and controlled way, you're really only challenging a tiny little part of the range of motion. So it's easy, 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 easy. Oh, it's there, it's difficult. And then the eccentric is also very, very, very easy. And then the bottom is easy as well. So 90 to 95% of the movement is easy. And then you usually hit failure and you're just like, oh, I'm done, because you failed a little bit of the range of motion. If you keep going, then you can tax more of that range of motion. Or if you use momentum, these are two sort of different things, then you can tax more of that concentric and then more of that eccentric as well.
What's interesting with this lifting heavier, but still with sound technique, is it kind of takes care of those things by virtue of you doing it. Because when you're lifting pretty heavy for your situation, you're not just going to be dropping the weights down because it's going to feel awkward on the joints, your performance will suffer as a result, and you'll find this happy medium of a pretty aggressive concentric and a controlled eccentric. By contrast to Technique Cyborg, you're almost artificially baking in and trying to use tempo as a way of making it harder, using range of motion in ways that is borderline unnecessary for building muscle.
If someone's sort of Pilates and their hypertrophy training are getting mixed in together, it's challenging.
So you're telling me the happy medium is what we should be chasing for with technique, not using the lightest loads possible where you're ego lifting movement egoism to use as max range and display it and look pretty with perfect control. And you're also not lifting as heavy weight as possible where you have to cut your range of motion, use a ton of momentum, and you're not even feeling it in the target muscles.
And there's usually a pretty big range that is gonna be usable for hypertrophy training, right? Like if you're let's say you're doing a Helms row, like we did yesterday. I could probably use anywhere from 30 to 50 kilos, maybe 55 kilos per hand, and have a productive workout. Like the 30s would be more range of motion, I would get more reps, I would get just more at the top, it would be a little bit more controlled, and the 55s would be more challenging, it would look uglier on paper, but I would still be productive. It's hard to say equally productive, but I could still get something out of them for sure. Now, if I go below 30 or above 55, each of those run into separate problems, right? Like for me, the 20 or the 25 kilo dumbbells on a row,
you're going to be doing 20 plus
30,
reps.
35, 40, and just maybe if I pause at the top, but again, you're only really taxing the very top. Maybe if I went way beyond failure, but at a certain point, it's just not enough weight to be productive unless you are moving in that super slow and controlled way, but that has its own issues. And then if it goes too heavy, if I try to row the 60 kilo dumbbells with both arms at a time, it's just the range of motion drops off very quickly.
Super low reps you're using.
Exactly. Or I start to cheat a lot and bring other muscle groups into it, and then it's hard to make the areas I want to target actually the limiting factor. So
that's fantastic because you can look at it in two different training sessions for your row. You can have the heavier day where you're training in a 5 to 10 rep range and you know your weight for that. Then you can also have your 10 to 20 rep range too with a given weight, and both allow you to achieve the same outcome. It's just heavier, you'll start to reach technical and muscular failure sooner, and the more moderate rep range a bit later. But once again, you're getting that happy medium there. You're not doing it super heavy, all the problems that come with that, or super high rep where endurance, bit of a waste of time.
And I think there's some research on daily undulating periodization, and I'm not like a science guy, but I do keep up with things. And varying your rep range it's something bodybuilders have done for a very long time. And rep range is something that is fairly forgiving. So you can, the 5s, the 10s, the 15s, the 20s, even upwards of 30, they all have a time and place. It's not like one is better than the other. It's very situational. It is very exercise dependent, but it doesn't have to be, just 8 to 12. That was kind of the idea. Even when I was getting into lifting 10 years ago, I was like, 8 to 12, that's hypertrophy, like 1 to 5, that's strength, and then 15 to 20 is endurance.
Definitely not 7 or 13 reps.
No.
Impossible to do those.
No, if you do them, you explode. It just
your session is just null and void.
No hypertrophy for sure. 7s and 13s, that's gross.
God. You adapt to what you do as well. So if you spend most of your time with the 5 to 10, you'll be really proficient at moving weight and training in that range. And your performance will be best and progression in that. Same thing goes for higher reps that are a bit more metabolic. And a well-rounded approach that I like, I know you do as well, Jeff, is just doing both. Because you're getting the metabolic benefits of higher reps for all the advanced science that comes with that. You're getting the neural adaptations from lower reps. Both that you do, given proximity to failure, you're getting muscle growth. Plus, you're also getting two different things to progress with. I know if I came in and I only had that 8 to 12 rep range and I have to do that on the same exercise indefinitely for the rest of the time, I'm going to get bored as hell. I'm not going to be motivated to push myself. Whereas if I've got a row session that's 5 to 10 and then I have another one that's 10 to 20, I've got two different ones I can progress with. Happy days. I keep training.
And I think often what you haven't been doing is kind of like low-hanging fruit. I mean, I'm actually pretty consistently surprised by how many powerlifters, like professional, high-level, super advanced, world record-setting powerlifters, they throw in on the off-season typically, like sets of 10 to 15 on their squats. And so it doesn't have to be super specific, even if the goal is strength. And if the goal is hypertrophy, I mean, if you've been only doing higher reps, I think some lower reps could be very, very beneficial and can drag up other rep ranges, and then vice versa. If you've only been doing lower reps, throwing in some higher rep stuff, maybe even a finisher every once in a while, I know those have gotten a lot of hate, can be actually very, very beneficial. And more often than not, people are shying away from what makes them uncomfortable. So if they've only been doing those low reps, oh man, a set of 15 on the squat, like I could never do that. No, you can do that. It'll just take a few weeks to adapt. But after that, it won't be as bad and it could actually be beneficial in the long term.
Great advice. I couldn't agree more with doing both of those. Technique paralysis analysis is an absolute curse that is holding people back. Internal cueing versus external cueing is something that people should understand. Take, for example, a pull-up. With internal cueing, this would be, okay, when I'm doing the exercise, I need to be thinking about depressing my scapula, retracting them. I've got that at the front of my mind every single rep.
Yeah.
Versus external cueing, just pull as hard as you can,
Yep.
get your chin above the bar, or try and touch your chest to the bar.
Yep.
This overthinking technique cues and while you're doing it is doing you a disservice from a performance perspective. There's been a ton of research on this showing that
Yep.
that outcome focus makes you so much stronger.
Yeah.
And this comes in line with the technique cyborg, perfect technique, watching YouTube fitness where there's 6 different cues that you've got to be thinking about at any one time. You talk to anyone that is advanced.
Yeah.
There's not much going on in here. At
Yeah.
most, there's
Yeah.
there might be one cue, and it's often an outcome focused cue.
Yeah. I would say that's a good rule of thumb. Maybe the exception would be if something is a weak point and you're trying, you kind of have to, right? Like for example, my lats are definitely a weak point. And so maybe doing something like a cable row where you're just really, it's light and you're really focusing on the contraction. But I wouldn't necessarily say that the main goal there is hypertrophy. It's almost like for that mind-muscle connection. And this is one thing that I've actually kind of changed my mind about, where I used to be like, oh, mind-muscle connection, no way. And I do think that in general, external cueing or just being so in tune with the movement that you can just do it without being too cerebral. But if it's a weak point, if it's something where you just have trouble connecting with it, or when you're doing your compounds, you're just not using that area as much as you could be or should be, I think that's one of the times when I do actually like cueing. But I almost look at it as like a temporary thing, like almost like a crutch that you use because you have to. Yeah.
Okay, so it's more of a learning how to activate those areas so that when you're doing your heaviest lifts or most other exercises, you can better integrate that into it.
Exactly.
But not technique. Got to think about it for every single exercise.
No, it's very situational. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say most of the time, I certainly wouldn't over cue people because when you're coaching someone, especially like you want one thing, maybe 2, but probably just one thing. Like when I watch a powerlifting meet or something and I hear the coach saying like hips back, hips up, and just
knees out,
yeah,
chest
it's like
up. Which one do I do, coach?
Ideally you want that stuff to be taken care of in your training and before, so that when you do the movement at a meet, you can just do it. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, the reason this comes up, and it often gets conflated with a personal trainer or coach's knowledge and what should be done.
Yeah.
Because a coach can see, maybe you should be putting your elbows tucked as well as keeping your ribs down and driving your knees out, whatever it is, the multitude of things. But in reality, you can only really do one thing at a time. Yeah. You might be able to do everything at once with baby weights or body weight, but that's not.
Yeah, and this is where like you might have to build yourself back up. Where you do it well with lighter weights, and then you gradually kind of build back up to the weights that you were using. But most of the time you can kind of correct things with normal working weights, particularly for hypertrophy. When someone's like, oh, your knee moved a little bit in a squat, like back down to the barbell only, or some kind of wooden dowel, and like that's all you can use, or someone might say, oh, a 500-pound perfect squat is better than a 650-pound squat with a little bit of knee wiggle. It's not actually all that useful to always be thinking about perfectionism and reducing the weight. It has to look perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, your body is made to move in more than just what looks like a super aesthetically pleasing way, and it'll be fine. Yeah.
Most definitely. And then at the back of your mind, always choosing comfort over what you think should be done technique-wise. Because you could read on paper that doing this cue is going to improve your upper body muscle mass by 25%. But if you're in pain, you can't lift as heavy, you can't progress because you're trying to do the perfect thing, then just choosing first and foremost what feels comfortable for you.
Yeah, I can't think of any potential theoretical benefits that are worth getting injured over? None.
100%.
None.
None at all.
No.
FitnessFAQs workouts include everything you need for calisthenics mastery. Learn step by step how to go from beginner to bodyweight beast. Shop FitnessFAQs.com. With respect to tempo, what does perfect technique look like in terms of rep speed? What would you be looking at as a general guideline for compound and isolation exercise?
Yeah, so I think actually Jeff Nipper did a study and it was like 2 to 8 seconds.
8 seconds is a long
It's a very long time. So that's a very big range. I would say if I saw someone doing an 8-second eccentric or concentric, there are probably some issues. Now, if you have to spend 8 seconds on the concentric, you're probably not getting any reps after that, most likely, or you're sandbagging the concentric. I would say the concentric should always be controlled but forceful and aggressive, and there are very few reasons to slow down your concentric intentionally. To me, that just does not make sense. A forceful and powerful concentric is going to be better for strength, most certainly better for hypertrophy.
But I've also heard that an explosive concentric is fatiguing, Jeff, and that we shouldn't do it too forcefully because that's not optimal for hypertrophy.
I think if someone is worried about fatigue that much, they're probably doing the wrong thing. They should pick up stamp collecting or, I don't know, gardening or something. Actually, gardening might be also a little bit too fatiguing.
The fatigue fairy is real, and if that does scare you, then maybe this lifting stuff isn't.
Yeah. So I would say concentric, forceful, but not, I mean, if someone is like, it has to be as fast as well. No, it can be aggressive, but also controlled. Yeah. And then the eccentric, it doesn't have to be laborious, you know. Maybe on that last rep when you had a very slow concentric, like a grindy, and then you're going to fail, so you might as well like try to get a little bit more out of that. But for most of your eccentrics, they can be fairly fast, but again, controlled. And this is where a lot of beginners, they don't understand. They think, oh, controlled means it needs to be slow. But once you're more advanced and you know how to move, and you can still move fairly quickly and still control the weight. You know, when you see someone moving in a very rhythmic way, it's fast, but it's still controlled.
And it's also the control through the full range of motion is a nice guideline to go from, because you might hear control and you get through the hardest part really quickly, and then you control that last bit, or vice versa. Yeah. And it's, I just like to keep my training personally as simple and repeatable as possible so I can focus on what matters most, which is that effort.
Yep.
The technique being an aggressive concentric and a controlled eccentric. Not trying to be a try hard on the eccentric, but just a way that you can feel your muscles working as brakes is an example I like to give, because that way, you're getting something out of that eccentric, the muscle damage that comes with it, all that stuff.
Yeah, and if you look at, let's say, a pullover, I would say, like this part of the pullover, the initial part where the dumbbell is above you, not as important to control or go slowly.
You could be like, okay, 2 to 8 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Whoop. Yeah, exactly. So the way you were doing them, you could see like, okay, slow into that stretch. Probably partly because it's more useful to do that way, but also just because you can tell, okay, this is a little bit more...
Where it's challenging.
Exactly.
Is where you want to control.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're doing a squat, you want to control that bottom position. Yeah, pretty much any movement. Yeah, where it's most challenging, that's where you need a little more control.
What does perfect technique even mean in bodybuilding? Which is why this topic is so hard to discuss, because you can have the extreme examples, technique cyborg, or ego lifting, heavy, where it's all momentum hoisting.
Yeah.
There's this gray area in between, and it's so hard to define what perfect technique means across every exercise. How do we make sense of that,
Well, you kind of know it when you see it, but it's also going to be individual. So everyone is going to be a little bit different, and certainly there are some people who are more on that ego lifting side of things. But often it still works. That's the thing. It just might be a little bit riskier or beats you up a little bit much. And so if you're doing your dumbbell rows and really just yanking it, that will probably still build your back. it just might be a little bit harder on the elbows or a little bit harder on the shoulders, or maybe you're gonna have to use straps or something. Same thing with Branch Warren. He's this video of him doing overhead presses, and it's just just a madman.
Yeah.
And then his coach is like, man, Branch has come back from so many injuries, but he gets broken down. And he always comes back. I'm like, maybe you should change something at some point. And so, yeah, he maybe would benefit from a little bit of technique cyborgism, but for most people, yeah, I think finding that middle ground is probably a good idea. But realize that middle ground, it's not a middle point. It is, there's quite a bit of space in there where, and you could even do the same thing for the same exercise and vary it. So maybe you pyramid up, and as you go heavier, maybe you use a little bit more momentum. Or maybe you start with this top heavy set that is a little bit heavier on a dumbbell row, and then your back downs are a little bit more controlled, a little bit more squeezy, mind-muscle connection-y.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
It's the shades of grey when it comes to technique. Yep. And it's the same example that you can give for the hypertrophy rep range, or just rep ranges period. Yeah. It's not as if you do 4 reps and you're stimulating 0 muscle growth.
Yeah.
If you do 31 reps, you're completely in endurance territory. It's the same thing with lifting heavy, and then also perfect technique, how there's this point where they coalesce.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can also just go by how you feel on that day. Sometimes there have been points where I think, oh, I want to lift this much weight, and then you're warming up and it just doesn't feel good that day. And I think in general, on those days, you probably want to go a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit more controlled, and that could still be very, very productive for hypertrophy.
There's also a difference in terms of perfect technique and what that means based on individual makeup. Different limb lengths, different mobility will change, for example, how you squat.
Right.
We've got the Lane Nortons of the world. Yeah. It's the perfect example. Everyone gives the same example.
Yeah. The folding chair, yeah.
Folding chair, he's very low bar, backwards transfer to load up the posterior chain. You compare that to an Olympic lifter with short femurs, the torso length, and they can stay completely upright. So perfect technique in that context changes based on your makeup, and you've got to find what suits you for every exercise category.
Yeah.
Vertical pressing, horizontal pressing, squatting, hinges.
Yeah. And I think Lane would probably be the first person to tell you his squat style is likely not the best for quads, right? Just because it is very hip dominant, he's sitting back. But for his purposes, I mean, he had a pretty darn good squat. World records, I believe. So,
and he's got those really long femurs where it'd be tough for him to do a quad-focused squat because his loads would have to be reduced significantly. Yeah. He'd have to use a bunch of cruxes like heel
Squat
elevation, 30 degrees or something.
He would probably get a decent amount of quad stimulus from chopping the weight down a lot. But for him, for the powerlifting goals, like the specificity is the most important thing, yeah.
So how do people find that for themselves in terms of what technique suits them?
Well, I think first you kind of have to start with what your goal is. So if your goal is strength, you're kind of going to have to be tied into what lets you move the most amount of weight. So you see some French powerlifters where, I mean, they're doing low bar and the bar is like hanging off the rear delts and they're just super inclined. And it's a very, very specific style of squat, really just done to maximize their leverages and to lift the most amount of weight possible. Same thing for something like a sumo deadlift, where maybe they have hips that just move really, really well when their knees are super far out, their feet are basically to the plates, the range of motion is cut down really, really low. Or a bench press where the grip is really wide, they're really arched. Yep. I think there's something called like the zero range of motion bench press, where the arch is so extreme that there is no range of motion. They're fully locked out, and the bar is still on their chest. And so that's where you have the new change, where it says that I think your elbows or your upper arm has to get to parallel or something like that, because like you have the rules, and then you have the people who are trying to maximize their performance within those rules,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
which I think is totally fine, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
Just because, I mean, it's not cheating if literally those are the rules. So it's not, it's just incentives that make it look a little bit ridiculous at times, right?
Yeah.
And so their perfect technique might have a lot of hate on the internet, but if they're a competitive athlete, like,
Yeah,
fair enough.
if strength is the goal, you've got to make the exercise as efficient as possible
Yes.
to move the most weight as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas bodybuilding, hypertrophy, it's this kind of in between. It's not
Yeah.
as if we're trying to make it as hard as possible on the
Right,
muscles.
right.
You still want to have a decent amount of weight lifted
Yeah.
to get enough mechanical tension to
Yeah.
stimulate stress and grow. But there is room for making modifications to make it harder.
Yeah.
So with the bench press, we can do something like a Larsen press,
Right.
where you've got a flat back,
Yep.
you've got your legs up in the air, so you've got no leg drive,
Yep.
you've got the biggest distance the bar has to travel as well.
Yep.
Significantly reduces the weight that you can lift, but it still feels heavy.
Yes. Yes. And this is where you have that power lifter who is maximizing their performance on one hand. The opposite mentality. People often say, oh, powerlifting and bodybuilding training, they're opposite. I don't think they're quite opposite. Yeah, you raise a good point there, where the opposite mentality would be, how can I lift the lightest possible amount of weight? So maybe you are using a bar that has a massive camber. Maybe you're pausing at the bottom for 5 seconds each rep or something.
It comes back to the cyborg technique where the
Yeah.
pendulum swung too much the other way, where
Yeah.
on paper it sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, big stretch, the time under tension, all these other principles you can
Yeah.
throw in.
Yeah.
But then it's about getting to that happy medium where
Yeah.
you're lifting heavy, you're using sufficient stretch.
Yeah. People, and it got really weird for a little bit, where people were almost proud of how little weight they were lifting.
Yeah, it comes into
Yeah.
ego from a movement perspective.
Exactly,
Look
yeah.
at how much mobility I've got. Oh, you're doing bench press with your hands to your chest. You're a wuss, mate. What are you doing?
Yeah. And so, yeah, having that happy medium in the middle where you're lifting a decent amount of weight, you're trying to progressively overload, but you're not completely optimizing things for that, but you're also not completely optimizing for how little weight I can lift. I think that's the way to go. And then there is a pretty big range in that middle, right, where you're using a variety of movements. Some allow you to go a little bit heavier. I still like a good rack pull from the knees. I could do above the knees and lift way more, but I just like that position. I get a lot out of it. And so some movements I go a little bit heavier. Other movements, I'm fine with going a little bit lighter. And so, yeah, it does require quite a bit of trial and error to find which movements are going to be where on that spectrum.
Including momentum into your technique seems to be on the surface, oh, you're just ego lifting, or you're using bad technique, it's not perfect technique.
Yeah.
But it really does have its place, because if you're including momentum on a row is always the good example.
Yep.
It allows you to, as you've gotten to technical failure, to get through the concentric
Yeah.
and do the eccentric. So I think we need to have a rise in popularity of momentum and cheating
Yeah.
in the right way.
Yeah.
If you use momentum from the very first rep and you're doing that for 15, probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
But if you've gotten to say rep 8, 10, and you want to do a handful of extra reps, I see absolutely nothing wrong with doing a little bit of body English. It'll create a little bit more fatigue, but once again, the fatigue fairy, we're in this for fatigue, baby.
Right, yeah.
We want to progress, and if you're trying to have that perfect technique on a row indefinitely,
Yeah.
get ready to lift the same reps for the rest of your life.
That's the thing. It is often very difficult to progress with that super controlled style. And I had an example of a dumbbell lateral raise, and people would say, oh, that's a bad movement because it doesn't work the stretch position, or like the bottom doesn't have any tension. And they are correct if it's done in a super controlled way, where at the bottom you're stopped, and then you slowly try to raise your arms up. Yeah, in that case, it is most challenging at the top.
Yeah.
But if you do them where you have momentum, maybe you're lying on a bench, your chest is supported, but you can still get a pop and an aggression out of the bottom position. The bottom is actually challenging because you have to try to build momentum to get to the top.
It's not as if you've skipped that stretch part.
Exactly. Like if you're going really slow, yeah, this is easy. But if you're trying to drive them up, there's actually quite a lot of tension at the bottom. And then you get to the top, and it's actually not as difficult as you would think if you just looked at a snapshot, if you just looked at a picture. I think a lot of people were just sort of looking at biomechanics from a textbook point of view, saying like, oh, look at the moment arms, look at the joint angles. That's not really how things necessarily work if you look at a video or if you look at real life in 3 dimensions over time. And then after you get from that top position and then you get down to the bottom position, you actually get a massive stretch because you have all that momentum of the bigger weights, the heavier weights going down, and then you have to reverse them out of that position. So actually the bottom position is in a lot of ways the most challenging. Like if you look at someone do with a bit of cheat, they often, you can see their face. It's difficult there and easy there, difficult there and easy there, difficult there and easy there. Whereas if you look at a snapshot, someone doing it slow and controlled, easy, difficult, easy, difficult. But the momentum, it's almost like they're floating at the very top.
And that's the key thing, is that by using that momentum, it allows you to lift heavier weights. You just would not be able to do that otherwise.
Yeah.
And speaking for myself, I know that if I wasn't to implement these strategies of momentum on lifts and using my body to help at least with some aspect of the concentric, my muscle growth would be so much less than it is now. Just, I can confidently say that, because by virtue of using lighter weights and perfect technique, it's going to look great on paper and great maybe visually, but internally what is actually the stress that I'm experiencing, it's just not the same as using that momentum.
Yeah, and it's a big difference in terms of the weight that you can move in a lot of cases. I mean, even just a slight cheat on some movements, it's not like your 8 rep max turns into your 12 rep max. It might be that your 15 rep max is a weight that you just couldn't move at all with super strict form.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe with a little bit of bounce or momentum, you can do it for 15. With super strict form, like you might cut that weight in half or something.
And the argument against this is common injury. You're more likely to get pain and whatnot, but the body isn't some little delicate butterfly that needs to be, you know, just, you can't put any pressure on it. It's, if you start this at a point that's reasonable for you, you will adapt to whatever that is, and you'll be able to get more out of your body by doing this. It's becoming more common now in the fitness culture that we're not as weak, and you know, as soon as we go out of a position, we're going to hurt ourselves. We've got so many cases of sports where there's extreme speed, plyometric, the ground reaction forces are so much more than anything we're doing in the gym. It's the most controlled environment possible. It's not as if you're doing those lateral raises and I'm going to come and push you from behind.
Please don't.
I will not hurt your gains. You're always in control of what you're doing. You've got more influence over that, and the environment isn't going to suddenly change and cause catastrophe.
Yeah, I mean, you have people who are worried about injury in the gym, and then they go play pickup basketball with their friends. Like that's, I mean, I don't want to fearmonger pickup basketball, but just, I mean, and they've done studies about like the number of injuries per hour or per 100 hours or 1,000 hours. And going to go play contact or even non-contact sports, obviously there's going to be a different, like, you know, ping pong is not going to be as dangerous as if you're playing flag football or something. But lifting weights is very, very safe.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if you, it's very low likelihood of injury overall.
You just got to progress it at a pace that's reasonable for you. The magnitude shouldn't exceed 10, 15%. Depends on if it's a compound or isolation, but this comes back to keeping a training log. You know what you've started with and what is reasonable, and just matching that up with auto-regulation. Because you've seen on paper what you've done, it doesn't mean that you have to do the exact same thing or increase it by a significant amount. You are the best judge of what you should be doing a day.
Yeah, and you can kind of, to a certain extent, go by feel. With experience, you'll be able to do that a little bit better. I mean, if you're a beginner, you almost don't know how you feel, right? Your body can kind of lie to you. But once you're advanced, you have a better sense of how you actually feel on that day. Still, your first warm-up probably doesn't tell you a whole lot. I've had times that I'm sure you have as well where your first warm up does not feel that good, but then you hit a PR. It's just, you're not really fully ready after just one warm up. Yeah. Or I've had the opposite where, man, that first warm up, oh man, I'm feeling really good today. And then the working set wasn't as good as I thought it would be. And so when you get to your last warm up, usually that's how, or your second to last warm up, that's when you'll probably know. But if you're a beginner, yeah, it's just harder because you don't have as much information to go off of.
With perfect technique as well, if you only ever use full range of motion, you don't get to harness the lengthened partials or partial reps at the end of a set to really fully stress your muscles. That's something that I've included more the past 2 years. Because coming from my background, it was always full range of motion pull up or you stop. Full range of motion row or you stop. But it's, why not just push that pull up a little bit further? Do some where you're only getting forward to bar, then halfway. That's an awesome way to get in some extra stimulus that may be dormant gains. I know for me, extra growth definitely has happened as a byproduct of doing some of those in my sets.
Yeah, and I think the key was that you knew how to push a set and you knew how to keep pulling. Because usually it's pulls and rows, presses and pushes, this doesn't really apply to as much. I've certainly done some presses where I did some like partials after, but I think it's not quite as useful just because fatigue sets in faster and you just can't keep up really any range of motion for very long.
Same thing with isolations, lead more room for this as well, for the most part.
Yeah. And so you knew how to push a set, and so your partials were still like high effort. You're trying to get full range of motion. You just can't, right?
And a really observation that I've found is that people could hear, oh yeah, I'll do some stretch partials, and they'll just choose, oh, okay, 8 reps, I feel like that's enough. Now I'm going to do some stretch partials. That's not what I'm talking about. You are trying to get your chin above the bar, and you physically can't. Because there's all these ways of, you can project as if you're doing the effort, but it's this whole volitional failure BS where it's, you don't choose when to stop. You stop when you can't do anymore.
This is where a beginner is like, so should I add some partials at the end? Probably not, just because you have to get used to doing a normal high quality set first before.
Because most people are 5+ reps in reserve. There's been countless studies with how far away from failure people train.
Yeah, and if you go to a typical commercial gym anywhere, I mean, you're not going to see a lot of near failure, let alone to failure, let alone beyond failure. So when someone's like, so should I add some partials? Likely no. Likely just focus on getting towards failure or to failure, and then maybe add them in later. But once you're advanced, I think that kind of stuff can be super, super useful.
With the technique and applying these to failure principles, just take your last set to that. If you are someone that's new to really trying hard, and as you've seen from watching the footage of Jeff and I, this is where we spend most of our time to try and eke out some more strength and size from our physique. We don't expect everyone to do this for every single set. We don't, truth be told, do this for every set ourselves. Sometimes we'll drop it from 3 sets to 2, but the key thing is we do our best on the final set of our day to have that. And if you apply that to your training,
it's huge. I mean, people don't,
it sounds too simple.
Exactly.
Just one of my sets has to be hard. Well, we look around the gym and people are doing 30 sets for isolation. And they can just keep repeating the effort again and again because it's 5+ reps from failure.
They can repeat the effort because it's not a very high effort. And so and I got stuck into this trap as well back in, say, like 2018 to 19, where, all these new studies are coming out saying that volume, that's the most important thing. And so you start to optimize for just doing more sets, but you lose something from that.
I've done that so much as well myself. The dreaded 4th set is the big one that catches me because intuitively I know I'm doing 4 sets. I'm not going to bring that effort until maybe the 4th set, but I often sandbag the early sets, and this is where the whole junk volume comes into play. So I wouldn't recommend with the whole technique, effort, discussion that we've had, people trying to do 4 or 5 sets because then you lose out on the effort.
Yeah.
And then also the one set probably has limitations there too.
Yeah.
I think if you apply what we've discussed with technique for 2 to 3 sets on multiple exercises for a muscle group, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think a 2 to 3 is a nice range. That's a nice default.
What's the difference between controlled cheating and just reckless cheating? Because there is a distinction between those.
Yeah, I would say, again, it's one of those things where you know it when you see it. I would say it depends on if you are starting and finishing the movement with the muscle group that you're trying to target. So if someone is doing a bent over, one arm dumbbell row, if they're cheating too much, it's like they start with the hips and then the back is kind of just along for the ride, and then they're not quite getting even just the range of motion at the top. And I've done reps like this, so it's not like me hating on this, and it can be fun. I mean, grabbing a 70 or 80 kilo dumbbell, I actually got an adjustable dumbbell just for this purpose, just to load it up.
And there's something too, even if your main goal is hypertrophy, moving heavy weight in that movement pattern, because then you can have that overall neural capacity to put that into a more moderate weight and sound technique.
Yeah, because after that heavy weight, the post-activation potentiation, I mean, you can drop the weight 20, 30, 40%, and it just feels lighter than it did on the way up when you were warming up. So that's quite nice. But I would say as a set of itself, it's probably not all that useful. Maybe for athleticism, it's more of like, you're training the hips more than you're training the back, really. That's sort of what is going on.
Coordination at heavy loads.
Yeah. Which again has its own potential benefits. But if I saw someone only do that and then nothing else, and they're like, yep, hypertrophy, going to get a huge back, and it's just like hips and then a little bit of back and then no control on the eccentric at all. I think that's another thing. If there is just no control in the eccentric, just it's pulling you, you're not controlling it. Yeah. Oh man, like that's probably a bit too heavy. And it's something that you can kind of feel with experience, where you do a certain weight for a certain number of reps and you just know if you went up, you get less out of it.
Yeah. What I like doing to get this happy medium of perfect technique coupled with lifting heavy and including some momentum to get the most out of my body, 80-20 principle applies to so many things. I'm spending 80% of my set doing what would be considered reasonable form, where if someone was to scroll on their feed and they came across my video, I wouldn't get too many hate remarks about your ego lifting, your form is trash, you're going to hurt yourself. But if they saw the 20% of the set at the end as the only thing, they might be like, oh, you're probably lifting a little bit too much there. That's a lot of fatigue. But that allows me to get the best of both worlds. So I'm getting strength through the full range of motion. I'm also challenging my muscles to the absolute max because I'm getting that extra overload with the eccentric as well. That's how I like to approach it for most things. But if it's heavier weights for lower rep ranges, you're probably going to kick into momentum a bit sooner.
Yeah, which is okay, as long as it's probably not the only, again, 80-20, not the only thing you're doing. So that they actually kind of balance each other out.
At large, it seems perfect technique, if I was to sum it up, would be choosing what is comfortable for your body that allows you to lift a moderate to high amount of weight that you can progress with over time. You feel it in the target muscles. You are applying that to both compound and isolation exercises with a tempo that matches the specific exercise. What would you add?
I think that's pretty well covered there,
Awesome. Well, YouTube knows what you want to watch better than we do, so you can click this video right here to, where is it? Could be on this camera, it could be here, I don't know. But you want to keep learning, you want to keep motivated, so check out the next video. Awesome. Cool.